Welcome to the world of ShadowWest, a dark fantasy western powered by the fast and flexible ShadowDark system. It's a new vision of our own Wild West. The sun can be cast into darkness for days. An alien mystical ore crashes to the earth during the hours of the bleak. Factions rise, trying to control its power. Myths come to life. Strange creatures roam the landscape and dwell in deep, dark mines. But in forgotten gulches and in the ruins of ancient civilizations, great power can be found. You can play as a gunslinger, a scout, a holy roller, a rough cut, range rider, or a mystic. All of these classes, many backgrounds, and unique legacy abilities have been created just for ShadowWest. You'll also find new rules for riding, trains, firearms, and a skill system. You'll also meet a whole host of dangerous and terrifying critters that now walk the deserts and prairies. Get out of the saloon and take a look around. See what is waiting for you in the dark of the Shadow West. Greetings, friends. Back here for another stream about ShadowWest. John Hartford here, Fox and Board Games, author and designer of ShadowWest. As I think everybody who will be watching knows, or at least I would assume they would know, the Kickstarter is currently going on. We have another 2 weeks until it finishes, and we are rolling right along. And I'll share that right now, right on screen. So we've blown past. We got up to 10,810 out of an asking of 1,500. And we are blowing through the stretch goals. We have, you can come here and read, go to the Kickstarter, read all about it. The link is right there in the comments. And we have blown through our GM screen, which will be designed throughout the summer, and everybody will get a PDF of it, and there will be print versions of it for sale through the Pledge Manager. And then there is another adventure added to the zine. In addition to the core book, we have the zine scale of Saggy's dime store novel, One Thrilling Adventures. And that is your adventure collection. There is one adventure that is going to be included in the core book, which will also be running at conventions throughout the summer and fall. And then we also went and tagged the +2 classes added to the core book. So that was earlier this week, just a few days ago. It was great to see it tick over to that next goal. And the 2 classes that are going to be added, and backers have already know this, as I've discussed it through comments and the updates through Kickstarter. The 2, I also have some new comments too. I should go check those out. It's been a busy few days here. So the 2 new classes are going to be the Entertainer, which is going to be your bard type class, anything from a saloon girl to an old-timey piano player to a circus tightrope walker to pretty much whatever you can think of and want to play in the Old West, you can make into an entertainer. And the second is going to be the Sky Caller. Now, the Sky Caller is going to be unique. That is the one, I will say, really indigenous, not indigenous in terms of indigenous First Nations people. It's like organic. The character that's really organic and ties into the lore of ShadowWest, ties into the Bleak and the Onyx Skyfalls that are being collected for their magic power. And the Sky Caller is one of the character types, or is a character type who can call and manipulate the Ornex and craft things out of the Ornex. So I'm seeing something like a little bit of Hermetic Magician, a little bit of Mad Scientist. I think it'll be really interesting. I didn't really know if that was going to become a core class to start, but I guess it's going to. So that'll be really interesting to design. And with that, on to tonight's topic. We are talking about designing and creating the character classes. So The first installment of this stream last week, which you can find on our YouTube channel, it began with an introduction as to some of my overall design thoughts and principles in making and balancing character classes, specifically drawing from ShadowDark and putting them in a Western environment, and how to kind of keep them balanced in line with what you'd expect out of a ShadowDark game. And I also talked a little bit about, what will make them the different, what will be the same, what I drew from directly, what I created. So that was all covered, excuse me, pretty much in depth last week. So I'm not going to go over that again this week. I'm going to talk about a couple things. I'm going to zero in on a couple of the classes I didn't get to. I already talked about the Gunslinger, the Rough Cut, and the Holy Roller last week. So this week I'm going to focus on the Mystic, which will be the last one I talk about, because a lot of people are very interested in that, but it's also the one that is still under the most scrutiny in development. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Range Rider and the Scout. So I think we're going to, and I just wanted to mention the next stretch goal at 15,000 is what we're all really waiting for, is the Dark Western soundtrack that is going to be written and performed by bandmate and good friend of mine and collaborator Brett McCoy, who's an amazing composer, musician, and sound technician. So that will be a real treat. Hopefully we're going to see that in the next week or two. Big thrilling news this week. We got a shout out as a featured crowdfunding game that's undergoing crowdfunding through EN World. RPG Reviews, Tabletop Game Reviews, one of the largest sites for tabletop game reviews. That was exciting. That was totally unknown to me. I had a friend text me yesterday afternoon and say, "Hey, you're on EN World." I was like, "What?" Now they had covered Trash Sexy too, but I'd actually done a lot of work connecting with people and kind of pushing that in front of people. This was just totally out of the blue. So that was great. So big thanks to Egg from EN World, who handles those reviews if you happen to watch this. So it was really nice. So things are moving along. Things are moving along with it. Let me just switch my screen share. And let's pull open a character. I think we're going to start with the Range Rider, I believe I said. So this will be interesting. So the Range Rider, this is also a class that's fairly unique to ShadowWest. Now, I saw in Cursed Scroll 2, the desert scenario, there are some rules for riding, which I'll have to go deeper into. And I'm going to take a closer look at that and see if there's anything that is compatible with how I was thinking of riding and mounted combat and actions on horseback and horses in general, or mounts in general, to work. I hadn't necessarily planned for there to be mounts beyond horses, at least not to start. I mean, who knows? Maybe somebody will end up riding a dinosaur around. That'd be cool, right? I'm not really sure. But greetings to the friends who just joined us. I just saw a few more people pop on. So, but the Range Rider class had a lot of debate, like what the 6 classes were going to be. And, I went through so we're going to have a Gunslinger, definitely, right? I knew we were going to have a Cleric analogous class, a class that has religious magic or divine magic. So Holy Roller was just this natural fit. Even the Mystic, though it's been challenging to design, this idea of this occultist in the Old West, that was kind of a no-brainer for me. The Scout, okay. The Rough Cut, I had to really kind of say what was going to separate it from the other fighting classes. As I went over last week, you saw they're extremely tough hand-to-hand. The joke is maybe they can even beat up dinosaurs with their bare fists. I don't know. We'll see. It'd be like Conan and Conan the Barbarian punching out the camel when it spits on him, right? These guys running around attacking monsters with their bare hands. But the Range Rider to me was really a different kind of class. And I've written stuff for these games for quite a long time, and I really wasn't sure like how I was gonna position this. I tend to find, unless it's a campaign, if we're talking about our typical fantasy games, and I've played several characters. I played several in old school D&D. I played several Cavaliers. I've had paladins in my group. I've had people that wanted to make mounts an essential experience in their character creation. And then it's like, oh, yeah, but we're going in a dungeon, and then the mount kind of is like, well, we're going to leave it at the door and hope it's alive when we get back. So, and it has varying results. So what I decided I was going to do is obviously in the Old West, horses are a big part of the environment. They're essential to the environment. They're essential to the mythology of the Old West. So I thought it would be really remiss to not have them be a major part of the game. And I thought I would be remiss to not make them the focus of the class. So the concept, after much debate, that I came up with was sort of a naturalist druidy character, but without druidic magic. The Range Rider does not use magic. They do everything instinctively. So the first thing I decided to do with the Range Rider is I gave him a reasonable weapon spread to start. Things that I thought a person on horseback, or that we often see characters on horseback in Westerns represented as using. Your knife, your hatchet, a bow. If you wanted to be somebody who's trained in a bow or an indigenous rider, a pistol, a rifle, these are the kinds of things. They can wear denim and duster, which is kind of the heaviest normal armor. It's not that heavy. It's like the equivalent to leather armor. And they do have fairly strong hit points. They have D8 hit points, because I thought, well, if you're out on the range a lot, you're going to be a little tougher. You're going to have to survive falling off your horse when you're first level, right? Or whatever. Like I didn't want them to be these really like easy to take out characters. And in fact, I think the only thing people might say and might call me out on is I have the number of characters with D8 hit points per level, now that I'm thinking about it, versus kind of the more average D6. But I only have one with D4. The only one I have with D4 is the Mystic. So there are a couple things that the Range Rider gets that makes it unique. The first of which is they start with a horse. They don't have to buy one. They are the only player character class as of right now that I have created that actually starts with a horse. And that was a major decision, because horses were very expensive in the Old West. And, the people we see in Westerns or read about in Westerns riding around on horses all the time were both, one, highly skilled, and two, they had the money for horses. Now, there are areas where horses were a little more plentiful. Yes, I know that. But for the most part, horses were not something that everybody had, at least not a good riding horse. They might have a draft horse to pull a cart, they might have a mule or something like that. But I wanted a solid riding horse to be a feature of the Range Rider to start. Whether you name your horse or not is your decision. There's the old cowboy maxim: don't name your horse. You never know when you're going to have to eat them. I don't know if that was really a cowboy maxim or whether that was made after the fact. And I certainly have no idea how often riders had to eat the horses in the Old West. But, you can personalize your horse as much as you want. It comes with a saddle, a bit, a feed, and a saddlebag, which allows you extra storage. Somebody who's wise might go, oh, okay, so the other advantage of this is I can carry more beyond my strength limitation. That's characteristic of ShadowDark. So, and the horse is loyal as long as you treat it well, and it knows basic commands and will return to if separated, if able. I just had a big debate with our longtime friend at Game Master, because in our games, our old games, our old jokes were that the horses always got eaten by something or killed by something. And if you ever left your horses, you just rolled randomly. I mean, that was honestly before I knew as much as I do now about horses. And yes, horses are prey animals, so there are a lot of creatures in the environment that might go after them. But horses are pretty good at finding their way back if they get temporarily separated. A horse will hang out close enough, for the most part, that you can often track down a horse that gets away or is panicked within a reasonably short amount of time. So, I wanted to say it'll know basically, it'll come back to you if it just runs off due to some fright effect, or if you have to leave it and then get waylaid. And I'm talking something within a couple hours is what I'm thinking. If you get kidnapped for 3 months, then you're probably out of a horse. But if your horse is killed or lost, you must train a new steed. And yes, I plan to have some guidelines for training a horse. I don't necessarily plan to make it an extensive. This won't be a horse simulator game. That's up to the individual party. That's the individual game, how deeply they want to get into it. Like thinking about Red Dead Redemption, which I've only seen a little bit of. I haven't actually played the game. I know it's I can't believe I'm writing this game, and I haven't actually played Red Dead yet. But I know that the horse interactions between the player and their horse in that game are basically a simulation. And I live with an equestrian, and she has informed me that it's extremely realistic in terms of how you have to take care of your horse. So I don't expect to go into those details, but you can if you want to. So obviously with that, the next first level talent that they would get would be expert rider. I do plan to have some penalties for people who are not riders, expert riders, if they want to do fancy things on their horse. Most people can get on a horse and ride it around, and after a couple of minutes, learn how to direct it. Hey, I've done it, and I'm not a horse person. Like I like horses, but I didn't spend a lot of time on them. I didn't grow up on them like some people. But I've been riding a couple times, and I've bin given very gentle horses, and they're like, here, just do this, and you can get your horse to do most things. And in every case, with this very easy, silly horse that they usually give me, who I like very much, I end up and being able to control a horse fairly easily, as long as there's no, I don't get a bear doesn't charge out of the woods, right? That's when you start to have to make checks and stat checks. And if you're not trained, you're going to get some kind of penalty, probably a disadvantage. And that'll also go for fighting on horseback or performing other dangerous tasks. The expert rider will not. The expert rider will be able to do all these things without penalty while on horseback. And that's what will make them unique as a class. You can have a gunslinger who's got a horse and is good at fighting, but they're probably not very skilled at having to do all those things they normally do while they're riding. But if you're just sitting on your horse, you want to shoot at somebody, I obviously don't think you're going to get a penalty for that. I'm talking if you're riding and you have to get your horse to jump over a fallen tree and try to shoot somebody at the same time. Those are things that the average person stuck on a horse is not going to be able to manage. So, or figure out how to do or hang on while you're doing it. So, just so it's been said, the mounted combat and riding rules are not done yet. I have similar rules from the game, or I have rules that I can draw on from the research I did for Tales of the Hallowed Land, which is my sword and sorcery game, in which, by the way, horses are extremely rare, or they're hard to come by, I should say. I did a lot of research and talking to equestrians about how things like this do actually work. So I have some good resources I can draw on, but as far as adapting to ShadowDark, I plan to keep it simple. That's my goal with this, is to not make this a game that is so unlike ShadowDark and becomes unplayable. So you also have a knowledge of horse care and health and horseshoe making. Now, just because you know how to make horseshoes does not mean you have a smith and a smithy or a hearth on which to make horseshoes, or an anvil on which to make horseshoes. You might have to find someone to either let you do the work or do the work for you, but you have a knowledge of how they're made, how they work, and if you get the right equipment, you could make horseshoes if you had to. And obviously, yes, treating your horse's wounds, caring for the horse, brushing, maintaining, grooming the horse, all these kind of basic things. So there was a lot of thought, like what I was going to do next with this class in terms of how I wanted it to interface with the world and the rest of the game and their other classes. And your first instinct is, well, we'll give them a fighting ability of some sort. And I said, no, because they're already better fighting on horseback than 90% of the other characters and player and non-player that are going to be roaming around in this game. So they will, in fact, have something called Plains Life, which is your kind of pseudo animal ken ability. You get a +2 reaction check when dealing with newly met horses, and a +1 when dealing with other wild animals. or I'm sorry, with other animals, both domestic and wild. So they have a little bit of an intuition of how to deal with animals and how to befriend animals and how to tame them, and also how to just make them less skittish. So let's say you run into a mountain lion. Your range rider, a mountain lion is not a horse. You might just opt to shoot at the mountain lion. That might be the option, as was often the case. But if he decides, or if he finds a wounded mountain lion, well, let me try to use my checks here, my action checks here to try to calm it. So maybe it'll just, I can assuage its anxiety and it can just run away and we don't have to fight it. And if, obviously, if he's going to be involved in buying a horse or bartering for a horse, the range rider is going to have a leg up, I think, on getting the best horse. So get it. So they also are going to get advantage on tracking and survival rolls on plains and prairies. And that was a decision to emulate this idea that a range rider often will go farther afield than someone who's just on foot or even has a wagon. They're probably going to go off trail more. They're probably going to deal with a broader range of environments. So they're going to get some advantage on just managing the wilderness of ShadowWest. Plains, prairies, deserts. Deserts are going to be rough because they're rough on everybody. But as a rule, they're going to be a little bit better at figuring that out. So there's your core range rider class. And I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of excited to see who's going to play a range rider. What kind of people are going to decide to play a range rider. And again, it's going to be largely up to the campaign. If you're working for a mining company, you spend 2/3 of the game in the mines most of the time. I don't necessarily think that a range rider is going to be the optimum character class to play. But if you're going to play a game where you're out roaming and adventuring a lot, a range rider could be very cool. So the one thing I decided that I was going to do was, if you're going to be a range rider, one of the things you should be able to do is improve your horse. Horses have 11 hit points, about the equivalent of a second or third level character, depending on class. But I thought it'd be kind of cool if your horse has a chance to level with you. So the Snake Eyes effect of the talent rolls is your horse can get additional attack and damage or hit extra hit points. So that's pretty cool, I think, personally. The other thing they can do is gain a +1 on one type of weapon, such as a hatchet, a pistol. There they get a little bit of a fighting advantage. Gain an additional +1 on riding-related checks if they want to really up their horsemanship and be like a real expert on the horse. And then they get the obligatory, they get a +2 to Constitution, Dexterity, or Charisma, because those are all things that can be used in tandem with the talents. Or they choose a talent or +2 points to distribute. That's kind of your standard default boxcars for talent checks. So you can build your range rider up fairly nicely, I think, based on what you roll or what you get to choose. And they can take different paths. You could be kind of a warrior on a horse. You could be an expert, trick rider. Hey, Sam. You can be. Oh yeah, and by the way, I just wanted to say, Sam sent me a note earlier. Apologies to anyone who came on at 6 p.m. Eastern time. That was a meta issue because when you make an event, apparently it just doesn't automatically adjust the event to the event time zone. So it thought it was 8 p.m. Or thought it was 6 p.m. We set it at 6 p.m. Mountain Time to adjust to Eastern Time. It didn't adjust to Eastern Time. Is basically what happened because we set it in Mountain Time because that's when the event was made, was on Mountain Time. So again, if anyone logged in before and was like, "Where are they?" Well, here we are now, and hopefully you'll see this now, or you'll see it in rerun. So yeah, that's what you're going to get as your basic range rider stuff. This is Lisanne, our artist who just came on. She actually did not do that art though, but there will be some more art from her in a little bit, including a premiere of a new piece of art, which is pretty awesome. So here are your titles. I decided to have some fun with those, diving into different cultural and vernacular for cultural words and vernacular for people who ride horses. And I thought it was interesting because I did a lot of research on the term cowboy. because your first thoughts just call us the cowboy. Okay, well, aside from gendering, right? Cowboy, right? That's. By the way, there were cow hands. Hey, there you are. Glad you like it, Elise. There is history of women in the Old West being called cowboys. And what's interesting is cowboy was actually a kind of derogatory term for the most part. It either had this connotation of a person who was a low class, kind of like a, uncivilized, right? And there was the famous gang called the Cowboys. And at the OK Corral, that was kind of where the term became popularized, because the Earp brothers, their main rivals were the gang called the Cowboys. And that's what they called themselves. And they were all outlaws, and they were bad guys. They weren't, not the Earth gang. The gang they had the fight with at the OK, the shootout with the OK Corral. Excellent series on Netflix, I believe, right now, that documents that in a very dramatic fashion. It's actually a lot of fun to watch. But it also goes into all the politics and history around the OK Corral. Like, that was just one small event of the Cowboy War, quote unquote, the Earp brothers and their war on the Cowboy gang. And it was really interesting. So Cowboy was not necessarily, hey, good, glad you made it, Scott. No worries. We were running all. This has been an exciting night for technology. So fortunately, it's all working right now. We were all kind of like at the last minute, like, all right, get everything running, because things were not as smooth as they were the last two streams. That's how it goes. So the term to not use the word cowboy was really like intentional on my part. And I went through the entire like vernacular of like, what do I call them, right? So I just decided rider, but then just calling them riders was kind of lame. I thought, okay, range rider, and that's how I came up with range rider. But I went through all these terms and researched all these terms, and like, I didn't know buckaroo was actually from vaquero, which was the Spanish word for cowhand or cowboy, or or specifically a mounted cowboy, someone who was on horseback a lot. So it's interesting that I got to dig into a little bit of the history that I kind of knew, in the language and the framing that I knew, but I didn't know a lot of the deep history for it. So then I have, and by the way, for anyone who's just tuning in, this whole stream will be available later on YouTube as well. So if you want to catch the beginning of it. And we have the range rider stats. We have the horse stats here, your average horse, as per the ShadowDark rulebook. I actually have to check if I can. I think I saw that I could replicate statistics. I can't add any of their flavor text, but I can replicate the statistics, and as long as I cite it. And I will, of course, have all the citations to the to the game. And here's what you start with. And there's your 4 extra gear slots. And so here's our range rider. I mean, Thomas Grain's a Mormon range rider. And I'm watching American Primeval right now. And it's really brutal, gritty, dark Western, but it's actually very historical. And the representation of the kind of militant Mormons is really interesting, which, I mean, I knew about that anyway, but seeing them represented. So his horse is named Minuteman. And he's got expert rider and plains life that I went over before, and he has his +1 on riding checks. So he actually got the divine touch legacy when I roll. That's kind of cool. So maybe he'll be able to turn undead. He'll have his 1 first level holy roller spell. So then I've got his gear there listed. So that's what we got. That's what we've got for the range rider. If you have any questions on any of this, just shoot them out. I'm just going to roll through the classes. I'm going to talk about a couple other character development things. We'll do a reveal in a little bit. So here's a scout. So the scout was kind of the next class next to the gunslinger that I pretty much knew what I wanted to do with it. I mean, I pretty much knew that I wanted to be your rogue/ranger type character. So I wanted to incorporate both elements of both of those concepts into this class. Thanks. Yeah. Well, the research is part of what I obsess over. Call of Cthulhu. That's one of my favorite parts of the game is the research. My favorite fantasy game ever is Ars Magica, which is set in medieval Europe, which is, so overly complex in some ways in terms of the amount of research you have to do to run this game properly. They have a lot of good source books, but the historical research is part of what I really get into with all this. And even if I do a fantasy setting, when I get Tales of the Howard Land up and going finally, that was 4 years and one focused year of research. But this is fun because I knew quite a bit about the Old West anyway, and the mythology and the history, but digging in, it was really like having to go in and separate out our pop culture, which there's a lot of that here too. There's a lot of pop culture elements to this, and action Western and weird Western elements to this intentionally, but I wanted to root it historically. I didn't want it to be total fantasy. And I didn't want it to be like a few other supplements for other games that I've picked up that are usually not actually, they're usually third-party supplements for the Old West. And some of them have been really bad, like really poorly researched. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, a major company like put this out. Now, some of them were quite a bit older too. So there was a lot of stuff in there that just shows that they were written at a certain time culturally. And they have certain opinions in them about other, about how things were in the Old West that we know now just were not accurate. So that was a big part of what I wanted to do here, is to make it fun and exciting and make it Western fantasy, but also keep it honest. So the Scout, like I said, I kind of knew what I wanted to do with this, and I wanted to keep the weapons simple. Your hatchet, your knife, your bow, lever action rifle, and your bolt action rifle, common things you might see someone in a Scout's line of work knowing how to use. Bolt action rifle, of course, for long shots and for hunting, big game. And they're not common in the Old West, by the way. They were what we called elephant guns. So the elephant gun was the next they were often black powder guns. They were the next stage up from even a common bolt action, like our equivalent of like a 308 or something like that in terms of power. But they were much more powerful and much harder to use than your lever action. So they weren't common. They're military weapons, really, and hunting weapons. And you got your denim and leather and hides. You can wear your armor. And what do scouts do? They scout, right? They scout, they sneak, they lurk, they ambush. They do all the things we want the roguey ranger character to do. They get advantage on tracking, climbing, camouflage, hiding and sneaking, and outdoor survival. They're the people you want out ahead. Now, how do I picture them? They could be an ex-army scout, right? Like kind of a person who's formerly military, very law and order, but will take the job to get people from point A to point B. They could be your crazy backwoodsman, right? Your backwoods hunter that maybe you have to hire as a guide or you have to avoid when you walk into his turf. They could be a Native American, right? They could be any number of sorts of cultures or characters who might be good at scouting. And that'll help define what you choose and what you focus on as your character advances. The other thing they can do is ambush. They can ambush like a rogue. Now, so we had a rogue very briefly in our Shadowrun game that I run in person, that very infrequently. And I guess I never realized just how much damage rogues really did with their weapons. But I guess it makes sense because that's kind of like, that's one of the main things they do. So this is, you get an additional die damage and add additional weapon damage dice equal to half your level, rounded down. So again, when you ambush, you can do a tremendous amount of damage like a rogue in ShadowDark. And especially if you're ambushing at a range, if you're ambushing with a bolt action rifle and you're high level, you might be doing an additional 4 or 5, dice of 6-sided dice of damage or 8-sided dice of damage. I forget what I listed the bolt action is. Did I put damage down here on bolt action? So yeah, they're D8. Bolt actions are D10. So if you're at range with a bolt action, you get an ambush attack, you can do tremendous amounts of damage. You're probably going to get one shot, but that's fine. And then the other thing that the scouts can do is parlay. Because I wanted the scouts to also be people who understood the people that they would be encountering when they were in the wild. And they can open dialogue or intelligent creatures that they encounter while traveling. And they don't have to necessarily even speak the same language. Or they could have minimal common language. And I thought it'd be interesting that if they greet them in a non-threatening fashion, they get to add +1 to the reaction checks. So, if you meet something totally hostile, or you meet a gang of bandits who are dead set on robbing you, probably parlaying isn't really going to work. But if you meet a creature that's not sure about you but's intelligent, or you meet travelers who don't know who you are and you want to approach them, that a scout is a great way to do that. Now, the funny part of this is the first kind of thought I had was, well, what if the scout's like a bounty hunter? And they use this to get close to a person they want to try to arrest or kill. And so they could, just because they can parlay doesn't mean they're going to be honest or they're going to be nice or they're going to be trustworthy. Thus, you can have your chaotic scout. I thought that'd be kind of cool. If as an NPC, even if you don't get to play one as a PC. Now, I assumed that though I'm picturing the scout mostly being outdoors, I would just allow a lot of their abilities to apply in hostile indoor environments like caves or whatever to make them more useful too. That was my one caveat about the Range Rider. My only concern about the Range Rider is if you're in a game where there isn't a lot of open plains and wagon chases or anything like that, that someone might choose a Range Rider, be kind of like, oh, I barely get to use my horse abilities, right? And that's up to the group. I mean, that to me has always been up to the game master to have fun with and the group to agree on. But the scout I wanted to make versatile. I wanted to make them as versatile as a rogue, maybe without some of the roguey abilities like the pick lock. That's going to be the entertainer. The find traps and pick locks are going to be the entertainer, because entertainers in the Old West were often, not always, but often also keyed into underground elements. I mean, they are today too, if we're being realistic. At least a lot of the professional entertainers I know are definitely live on the underside of society a little bit. And I wanted to keep what the scout could do useful, even if they say I had to infiltrate, a fort or investigate an old mine, which is, of course, your first adventure. So what else? What kind of things do they get? Well, I took this more or less from the rogues, more or less from the ShadowDark or thieves, ShadowDark thieves. They do get a +1 on the parlay check. So again, if you roll well or if you choose your talents, you can build up a very social character and a character that gets what they want by talking to people. And I think that's really overlooked in a lot of games I played historically, like not just new games, but I don't know how many years ago we were running games where, half the party never thought about talking to anybody they encountered. And I think that's just the way gamers respond to things, from playing video games and being, antisocial and all these other things. Like violence becomes the first resort, or treachery becomes the first resort when, well, maybe you can just talk to them and find out what you want. When you get what you want by having a conversation. And maybe in the real world, we can apply that more too. That's another thought on that. Like, it's part of our culture too. So parlay, you get your ambush, you get your +1 die of damage. And again, like I said, when I started totaling up, I've only seen rogues in Shadow. I actually played one with James at Page last time. And I guess it wasn't, I wasn't very high level. I think I was 3rd level. But it wasn't until I really sat and totaled up like what a rogue could potentially do on an ambush or a sneak attack that I realized just how deadly they could be. And then you get your obligatory +1 to strength, dexterity, or charisma. They also can get a bonus on a melee or ranged attack. I left it open. Like, they're either a scout that likes to sneak in and get up close with a knife or a hatchet or their fists or a garrote, right? Or they're more of a ranged type character. Kind of how we establish rangers in D&D, for example, going back to 2nd edition, where your ranger could either get a proficiency or specialization in melee or range. I decided to kind of keep that ethos. I decided to kind of keep that going. And then the last one is, of course, choose a talent or +2 to distribute stats. I have a little flavor text for all my fun characters here that I'm making up. So here's some more Lisanne's art if you haven't seen it, which I'm sure most of you have. Her amazing crow scout that she painted. Now, even though there's a horse, it's not a range rider, just to be clear. He just happens to have a horse, but he's the scout, and that's fine. There are a lot more horses coming. There's a lot more horse art coming. I've been assured, because horses are cool. Everyone loves horses, and we need more of them in art. So here I have my titles. Again, I kind of played the range of you're either, kind of a person who's a loner and lives out in the woods or in the plains and knows what they're doing, or an adventurer, or you're lawful and maybe you've worked in some kind of law enforcement or the military, or you're chaotic and you're kind of out. You're kind of using your powers for evil and not good. So I think the scout will be a lot of fun to play. I think it'll be very versatile. But all these pictures are common or open license through Wiki Commons. And by the way, the end character sheets will not have these photos. They will have original art. These are all just placeholders. And I found a bunch of typos in the Holy Roller when I was looking over it earlier. But I think I've made it clear enough that I'm still developing all this. This is not a final form of anything. But I wanted to give people enough to just look at it and understand how the game was going to be different or similar to what they're used to seeing. So then again, I have his abilities. And I have his gear. And you got your scout there. So the last that I'm going to talk about tonight is going to be the Mystic. And the Mystic has by far been the most challenging to develop. First, I'm going to do a little reveal of some cool art. We discussed this character for a while, trying to come up with, Lisanne came up with the concept, trying to refine the concept. Excuse me. Dry air. So if I don't live in air conditioning, my house is like 80 degrees and humid all the time. So unfortunately, to dry myself out. So let me find her. All right, so let me just do a quick share to this screen before I go over the Mystic. A really cool concept here. And we're going to share over to... There's our Mystic. It's a character, our Chinese Mystic that Lisanne painted last week. Well, over the last several weeks, but I think I got the final last week or early this week. Everything's a blur, but recently, and I think it's awesome looking. A good representation of the bleak in the background. That it looks like night, but there's something a little off about it, especially if you start to look closely. There's just something a little strange about it. And she's fighting this creature here. Yeah, that's a really great painting. And I have the color, by the way, but I'm doing a sepia toning for everything, thanks to the magic of electronics, many years of Photoshop. So we have our Mystic there, channeling some energy, an energy bolt into that dragony creature. Well, I think that is an awesome image. And we decided to go with the Chinese Mystic because we hadn't had a Chinese character represented yet, and there were a lot of Chinese people in the Old West, and we wanted to do something that was culturally relevant. And the mysticism and magic is a big part of Chinese folklore, mythology, history. So we decided to showcase a Mystic there. So how does the Mystic play? This is the one class I've had the most questions about. Like how does this work in the Old West? So all of that I'm doing, framing in how do I want it to feel as part of the Old West? Hey, there's Ari. How's it going, Jessica? And I didn't necessarily just want to take a wizard and drop them in the Old West. That didn't make a lot of sense to me, even in a fantasy context. I wanted everything to have its place and to fit in with the mythology of this world. So the mystic, I would say that there were probably always people who could use magic throughout history. From the earliest tribes of humans had people who were thought of as mystics or shaman or some sort of spiritually imbued character. So I wanted to take the mystic and divorce the religion and this spirituality per se from it. Now, your mystic can think his powers come from wherever. I don't care where they think they get their powers from, but they don't get them from the Abrahamic God that the Holy Roller does. They come from another source. And my kind of philosophy is that the mystics in this Old West setting are holdovers, remnants of occult orders, ancient occult orders that came from the Middle Ages or earlier, or evolved out of the Middle Ages through the Renaissance, through the underground Venetian Renaissance, where we got a lot of our later a lot of our spiritualist sensibilities would come from the seances or the spirit readings, the tarot cards, etc., the imagery that came out of the Italian Renaissance specifically, but also from the earlier medieval period and from the Renaissance period from other parts of the world. So think like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, if you want to talk about, except really knowing magic, not just magic with a K, like really being able to use magic, unlike kind of the Golden Dawn interpretation of magic as force of will, though it is that too. By the way, I've spent far too much of my life in these territories. So this really started to go down mental rabbit holes for me of positioning and developing this class. And I had to reel myself in and be like, okay, but we still want it to be a wizard that throws lightning bolts in the Old West, right? Because that's what people want. So we'll get to that in a minute, like how exactly magic is the same and how it's different. But the core of it is more or less taken from the ShadowDark Wizard. And I just said, you know what? Let's just tweak the ShadowDark Wizard to start. So they have a limited weapon range because they don't train with weapons a lot. They have Derringer pistol, knife, and staff. They can wear denim armor, which anybody with a pistol or even a knife and denim in the Old West is not, not a wimp. Like, you kind of still don't want to have this person sneak up on you and shoot you, right? That's still not going to be good. Your hit points are D4, as is often the case. And the way that I see magic being learned in this world is, of course, they might be part of they might have an old tome from a master or that they stole that has some magic secret that unlocked the potential, or they're part of one of these occult orders that are still hanging around, which, by the way, I do have. There were two games that I found extremely inspirational when thinking about this class. The first is Castle Falkenstein, which is set in Victoriana. It's clockwork steampunk Victoriana, before steampunk was a thing. This game was around in, I think, the late 80s or the early 90s. It was this really nicely crafted world, but they did a lot with secret societies and occult orders as part of Victorian England and America. The other is there was a game by Chaosium called Nephilim, which, of course, has relationship to the biblical mythology of the Nephilim, which, as you see, I'm wearing a shirt that says Fields of the Nephilim, which all ties back into developing this game. And Lisanne knows, if you know, you know. If you've known me a long time, you kind of know how this all feeds in. But in Nephilim, they had a whole book on Victorian secret societies and a source book for this game. And in this game, you were playing as an agent of the Nephilim, and you were in a secret society. And the secret society book was really well done. And so that's where I started drawing a lot of the ideas from the Mystic class, that you're not like a wizard wandering around. Yeah. Yep. And you're not just a wizard wandering around the Old West like Gandalf. You are instead like a learned occultist, or maybe an instinctive occultist, but you somehow channel something else. So how do you do that? Well, you start off with spells as normal, like you would in any other game. But you learn new spells by uncovering ancient books, inscriptions, artifacts, cave paintings, temple ruin writings. I see this as part of the goal of the class is to find areas of reported mystical power, magical power, and go there to get more power. And I think that's an interesting take versus I go to the wizard school and I pay for my monthly dues and I get taught new spells, which that works fine in plenty of games. It works fine in D&D. It works fine in so many other games. But I wanted this to be a little different. Now, they have a talent called Arcana. And what Arcana does is that allows them, that gives them this fundamental knowledge of things. And we know, yes, that's a common skill in a lot of other games. But this gives them a fundamental knowledge of ancient books, inscriptions, and artifacts. So they can spend time and do an intelligence check and attempt to learn things about that, or even deciphering the language. And when they do that, if there are magical spells attached to it, they can learn those spells and add the spell to the repertoire. So there's this impetus for the mystic to go out and investigate things, right? I mean, they might have a library. They might have a repository of magical knowledge, but let's just say they hear about the ruins of a civilization that predate humans off in the desert. Well, who knows what kind of magic's there? And don't forget, in ShadowDark, you can actually learn spells above your level if you're successful at it. They're harder to cast and they're more dangerous to cast, but you can actually go and find really powerful magic and learn how to use it in this game. So I thought this was kind of a cool idea, way to incorporate it. The other thing that separates this from a standard Old West spellcaster is that, as I said in my vision of this world, much like most modern fantasy or Old West fantasy or Victorian fantasy, there were people who carried this lineage of magic use through the ages, usually underground, usually being hidden. Well, when the Bleak started and Ornyx started raining down in a meteoric fashion, people started figuring out that when they worked with Ornyx, they had power, or they could more easily focus power. They could gain power by using this ore, the energy within this ore. So every mystic has an Ornyx device. And by that I mean it's essentially a focus that is slotted to hold an ore of fresh Ornyx. And when it is slotted with fresh Ornyx, they can choose to use their device and gain advantage on any spellcasting roll. Now that's huge. And if you've even played a little bit of ShadowDark, having sat at a convention game where we pretty much were down to one torch because everyone's torches kept getting extinguished, and second time out, the wizard critically failed their light spell. Getting advantage on your spell casting is like really huge. And certain spells, if it already gives you advantage, you can cast it automatically without a roll if you're using Ornyx. So it's really powerful. The difference is you're going to start with D3 Ornyx nuggets. And once they're used, they're burnt out, and you throw the Ornyx over your shoulder or whatever you choose to do with it, and you load up more magic ore if you have it. If you don't have it, you don't gain the bonus. So you can still cast spells just normally. Ornyx obviously is in extremely high demand and is coveted. So getting more isn't necessarily easy, but it is possible. In fact, your talents include gain D6 nuggets of Ornyx on a 2 roll. That's probably your single most valuable talent. Considering a bunch of the game is going to be about these groups, these factions, these people trying to get Ornyx and get it to power their own ventures. We have +2 intelligence or a +1 on mystic spellcasting checks. And people usually say, well, why would you take your +1 on mystic spellcasting checks when you get +2 in intelligence and you get a bonus anyway? The reason is obviously if you max out your intelligence. you can gain bonuses, additional bonuses on your spell casting. Create one additional Ornex slot in your device. Now I'm going to say that at higher levels, there might be a spell. In fact, there is a spell that you can do this. And you can, but this is just, you just get it. And Ornex devices, I'm going to say, have to be like really high quality and they're expensive. So if you lose yours or it gets stolen or you break it, your character has to pay for a new one and get it crafted specially for you. So your goal is to not lose your Ornex device. And this allows you to enhance your Ornex device. So then you have 2 nuggets so that you put 2, or then you can get 2 advantage rolls before you have to reload. Then learn an additional mystic spell of any level you know. That's right out of the book too. And let's see. Yeah, you break it, you buy it. Yep. And choose a talent or +2 just to distribute to any stats. You know, your standard boxcars talent roll. So there's your mystic. And now we're gonna go. Of course, have my fun. Have my fun. Pishogre. Pishogre. It's a Scottish term for a conjurer. I thought that was kind of cool. I think it was Scottish. So I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. But oh look, I spelled awakened wrong. Awakened. Maybe that's your new. Maybe this should be first level. You can be awakened at first level. As I said, I was going through the Holy Roller earlier. I was just looking over it, and I found a bunch of typos. But as I said, these are write-ups. These are mock-ups essentially of the end characters. They're still under development. You get more spells than a Holy Roller. And here's your spell list. So this was what made it so challenging. So going back to what I said before, I wanted to make everything that I created as far as spells for this class seem organic to the environment. So I tossed a lot out. I tossed a lot of the standard spells out. I did look at Cursed Scroll 1 out at the Witch class, which is actually quite cool. I wrote Arcane Library and said, so I'm making this game. I really like some of these witch spells. And they said, no, you can't use them. So what they actually said is your license only extends to the core book. The Cursed Scroll stuff is not licensed. And there's reasons for that. That's cool. I mean, obviously, it's their game, right? So, but, they said, but if you make up spells that have similar effects and you write your own flavor text, obviously, we're not gonna come to your house and hunt you down. So some of these are inspired by, not even taken from, inspired by the witch spell, and some of them are things I just made up. You have quite a few that are going to work more or less the same way. Charm, detect magic. Okay, fine. Hypnosis, hold person, I call Serpent's Gaze. Hypnosis is Serpent's Gaze, right? I think. Or did I leave hypnosis in here too? This was the past 2 days of work, by the way. This was a lot of energy. Magic armor, magic missile. I mean, like I could rename those. Everyone knows what they are. Sleep. So a lot of your lower level stuff is kind of more or less the same. Terrain sense, I thought was kind of cool. Like they can go out. This would normally be more of like a druid thing, but I thought it would make sense to have a mystic who could be like a dowser. Like go out and look for certain minerals or oil or water and kind of magically sense where it was in the terrain. I thought that would be cool and fit in with the myth, or the rain find, or the oil finders. They were actually a guild that they claimed to be able to mystically have ghosts and earth energies tell them where oil was in the Old West, and they charge oil companies to do this. That's real, by the way. That's not a fantasy world thing. That's a real world thing. Were they successful? I don't know. Some people can do it. Arcane Decipher. Remember their ability to learn things via Arcana? Well, if their Arcana fails, or if they want to be sure, they can use Arcane Decipher. They can use a spell slot instead and figure out what's scrawled on the wall into this alien script of a cave. So then we have our tier 2 has a lot of stuff that you're gonna see is familiar. But here's where I start to kind of go off the rails a little bit. Ghost Light's a light spell, but you can basically make a little will-o-wisp. You kind of have a will-o-wisp wandering around with you instead of just making something glow, making a staff glow. Bell of Opening is your knock spell. But then I have Constrictor. That's kind of your hold person, but you conjure like an energy serpent that holds the person. and constricts them. I thought that would be kind of different. Dust Devil, it's kind of a mini area of effect, but it takes the form of a Dust Devil, a little tornado of dust. Then we have Mystic Sight, which allows you to see invisible and hidden things. I thought that would be kind of neat. And let's see, Remind us of Silence. I did put Familiar Spirit in here. I thought having familiars in this world might be cool. Could have your pet weasel, your pet owl, pet Gila monster, whatever it is your character would like. Disguise, I thought that'd be kind of cool instead of alter self. Alter self's kind of questionable in the ShadowDark book. Like, I get what it does, but the guidelines are so loose on it. I'm like, let's just call it disguise. Like, you can make yourself look like someone else, kind of become a doppelganger. That might be kind of cool for this setting. Familiars, yeah, there are no familiars in ShadowDark. At least I think the Witch has them. The standard, but I thought the Mystic was cool enough that they could get a familiar. And by the way, if anyone's wondering, like, are you going to have other types of spellcasters? If this game maintains popularity and people want to see additional spellcasting type classes, like a shaman type class or a more druidy nature magician type class, like, obviously this is ripe for it. This setting is ripe for it. So, I would be totally up to that, or something like a warlock, or a purely like, infernally inspired class, or a dedicated necromancer class. I'm fine with doing all that. It depends what the call is for it. The Skycaller, now the Skycaller is going to be its own thing. The Skycaller is coming due to, I talked about that earlier, I was saying, about the stretch goal characters. So the Skycaller is coming. The Skycaller is a caster who works with the Bleak and with Ornyx specifically. So they're going to be doing a lot of unique things. They're going to do things that are totally native to this setting. They were originally only going to be NPCs. But I said, okay, if we hit 10,000, I'll make them into a PC class. And so say we all. It will be a PC class. Eyebite's kind of cool. It's like the old Goblin legend that you can find. You can target a person and do damage to them, and their eyes are blind to you. They can't see you. I thought that'd be kind of cool. And then third level, we have some familiarity now. Instead of making a fireball and a lightning bolt, I just made elemental blast. Likewise, instead of wall of fire, wall of stone, wall of force, I made elemental shield. A snake whale system would be really cool. And I think the entertainer could be a snake whale system too. But I thought the elemental, basically you'll just choose an element when you learn that spell. So do you want it to be fire? Do you want it to be lightning? Do you want it to be force? Do you want it to be water? And then whenever you use that spell, you'd be creating an effect based on that type of element. It'll have guidelines for each element. Instead of making lightning bolt and fireball and wall of water. Well, I said, let's just kind of say each individual caster will learn it. I did put a summon animal spell in there. There was none in there. And again, they're probably saving that for a druidy type class. That's my thought. But I thought in this setting, being able to summon a pack of coyotes or, swarm of, I do have summon swarm. That summons swarms of bats, snakes, or large spiders. So that can be fun too. They're a little bit less under your control, but they're good for causing chaos. I kept some of the usual things in. Magic Circle is your protection, obviously. Draw the Magic Circle. Otherworldly creatures can't get to you. Animate Dead. Apport. Create a sword out of thin air or whatever. Viper is your damage over time. Also kind of like Constrictor. It appears as like the snake made of energy. It bites someone, does damage over time. And then in tier 4, a lot's the same, a lot's different. I've called monster, bat wings instead of fly. You actually sprout wings, spectral wings and fly. I thought that would fit the setting really well. Arcane Eye was kind of cool. I was like, oh, you make a magic eye and it floats around. I'm like, I'll keep that one. Sulphurous Cloud is like your cloud kill. Polymorph telekinesis is telekinesis. Shape Terrain, it will be your rock to mud or your craft water or part water. Like I'm gonna leave that open. That you just know how to shape terrain, and then You can use that as you want. Wraith form is your pass through walls and stuff like that. I took gaseous form and pass through walls and pass wall out, and I just put wraith form in. That's kind of a general thing that does both. And then in tier 5, that's the kind of out of control stuff. That's the arcane grounding, bind outer one. So that means if you come across a rogue, Shoggoth, or demon, or some other thing from another world that you want to bind, that you can bind it, but it has to stay in that place. Like, it doesn't mean you bind it and can keep it, in tow with you. It means you have to bind it and has to stay in that place. Now, that's also useful if your gate spell goes awry. If you critically fail your gate spell, or if you lose your concentration and that thing you just summoned is now running amok, you can bind it. So that's kind of like a safeguard against it. Craft Arcana is how you can make your own Ornyx slotted device, or you can make another form of magic item, or you can inscribe your magic into something, making effectively, though I don't know if I'm going to have scrolls specifically. You want to make you want to go onto a sandstone wall and preserve your spell on a sandstone wall so that others can come and read it and learn it. That's the Chain the Beast is your whole monster. Hand of Doom is your disintegrate. And Hidden Sanctuary is going to be kind of like the old Leomund's Tiny Hut, if anybody remembers that, where you make a little, it might not be a physical house. It's going to be your creative pocket dimension that you can go into. You and your friends can hide in. And shape change, obviously that allows you to turn into whatever, a jackalope. Shape change, jackalope. And yeah, so that's the Mystic. So the Mystic is going to be interesting. It'll be fun turning it loose. I have a feeling it's going to require a lot of refinement because I think, like in my mind, I'm like, none of this is too overpowered. And then the first time someone wipes out a whole adventure with one of the spells, I'll be like, well, okay, I guess we're going to rethink that. So that's the one class that I still think is going to require a little balancing. But much like my other classes, I did not stray. Oh wait, Julia, how are you? Thanks. I was even way out with the names of some of the spells to start. Like, I started getting Call of Cthulhu with it, like having these really arcane names for the spells. I'm like, nah, you know what? Like, it's still a fantasy game. Like, people still want to throw their force bolt, their lightning bolt, whatever, their fireball or their lightning bolt. They still want to polymorph. They still want to do that. So I think people are still going to want to have those abilities at their call, but I did want to make everything seem like fear is called dire howl. So I picture you throw your head back and howl like a wolf or roar like a mountain lion, and your enemies scatter. I want everything to be native to this world. Organic. I'm trying to avoid the words native and indigenous unless I'm specifically talking about people or animals, as far as native animals or indigenous people. But that's honestly one of my big problems with D&D magic from day one. Maybe not from the first edition, because first and second edition were what they were. They're so raw. They were such an idea at the time. They were perfect for what was needed. But a lot of what happens in fantasy game magic happens without context. And it's kind of still playing off the same fantasy magic tropes that have existed for 40 or 50 years now, that are so loosely based on something like Lord of the Rings, where ironically, if you read Lord of the Rings, or even if you watch the movies, you find out there was very little magic ever used in it. And the few things that Gandalf did, they were either really subtle or really huge. Or elven magic was so subtle they didn't even think it was magic. They saw it as part of nature. So our modern version of magic really comes from the 80s, which is okay. That's fine too. I'm fine with that. But when you're dealing with a world that kind of is going to have its own internal mythology and myth cycles, I didn't necessarily want to just take all of the same spells, keep the same names, and throw them in there. And these are going to be continued. They're going to continue to be revived. As I said, this was all done in the last 48 hours. The work on the spells, I've been no time, and I've been putting it off, and I finally dug in the past 48 hours in between grading a semester's worth of final projects, 5 classes worth. In between that, I decided to work on some spells. So yeah, well, exactly right. Technically, there's no real magic in Lord of the Rings. That's the funny thing about D&D originally being based off Tolkien. Though I would argue it's as much based off of Conan and Robert E. Howard and Michael Moorcock as it is Tolkien. But in Tolkien, like we always think of the wizard as Gandalf and that kind of that same image around wizards. But he actually, yeah, it was a totally different type of being. So it didn't even make sense in the terms of our standard concepts of magic. And then if you go to the earlier sources, like all the books on Hermetic magic and Arthur Waite's books of occultism and magic and stuff like that, that's a touch of ants. Yeah, definitely a touch of ants. There's definitely a chunk of that kind of Hermetic occultism that filtered into D&D. And I wanted to keep that because, like I said, I'm tracing this magic back to that root as well. So I thought a lot of it made sense, but I thought Disintegrate, where you cast your green ray and somebody or something vanishes. I thought in the Old West having, yeah, I haven't read Dying Earth, to be honest with you. So, but I've heard it's very good. I thought instead of Disintegrate, Hand of Doom would be kind of cool. Like, the black trench coated figure waves his hand and like somebody just disintegrates, like something out of the Preacher comics or something like that, where it's more of this kind of like really kind of dark fantastic thing that's going on. And it's a little bit more occult than it does just kind of like wizard school magic. So that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with this. Those are the characters, at least as of now. And now I get to also make Skycaller and the Entertainer. That'll be later in the summer. That's not a big rush thing for me. The next thing is going to be to really get these characters in place and do the play test. And I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be starting that. Several of you are aware of Game Day, which I'll be hosting June 29th at Oddbur Brewery in Stockton, New Jersey. I'll probably actually not be running ShadowWest. I'll be running it the following week at Dex Light. So that'll probably be the debut of it. But I do want to get some online games of it going over the summer. And of course, backers and people who are in my mailing list, in my Patreon, will be the first to hear about that and have a chance to jump in to play. Good, thanks. I'm excited to see the progress too. So the last thing I'm going to address, this is just kind of an address that I want to make generally about just because this question has come up several times. So let me pull up another text. Let me pull up the Book of Shadows, which is the ShadowDark book that I published earlier in the year. And the Book of Shadows is I think my second best seller next to Trash Sexy, not surprisingly, because it's ShadowDark. I kind of knew that. Download later. Okay, cool. This is it. So I've gotten several people who have commented on the skill system, and they've been put off that I incorporated a skill system into ShadowDark. Now, a couple caveats. I have been testing the skill system very lightly. I haven't spent a lot of time with it, but I wrote it and I've been play testing it in my home ShadowDark game. And it's two things. First of all, it's entirely optional. You don't need it to play ShadowWest. And in fact, if you look at my Range Rider character, there's no skills listed. And somebody earlier this week online, and this is a valid thing. I want people to voice this because I'll be honest. The first time I saw somebody put up a 5th ed version, like a Dragonborn, Arcane Archer or whatever, converted to ShadowDark, my gut purist reaction was, you don't need to do that. That's the reason why we're playing ShadowDark, because there's no Dragonborn, right? But obviously, everybody does with these games what they want to. That's what's fun about them. That's the goal. So someone saying to me, I really don't want to play this game if you have skills in it, I kind of get what they're coming from, right? But what I wanted to really clarify with this is the skills are entirely optional. You don't need to have skills on your characters to play ShadowWest. All the skills do is they give a little bit more personality and definition to the character backgrounds. There, I have them keyed to backgrounds. I even say why skills. That's like one of the first things I say. And again, I have this is for standard ShadowDark, and I've been playtesting it. I've had other people play it. A lot of people haven't wanted to bother with it, and I'm totally fine with that. I really like skills in games. That's like my thing. Like I love skill-based games more than level-based games. But what I didn't want the skills to do is to add another system. I didn't want you to have to roll skills to do things. And I think that's what people were afraid of. And I get it because part of why you play ShadowDark or old school AD&D or some of these other OSR games is so that you're not worrying about that. So that the characters are doing things that you as the player can conceive of and that are within their natural abilities. So all they do is, and I have a bunch of skills. I have athletics, I have craft, I have climb, I have sneak, I have survive. All they do is if you're performing one of those actions and you have the skill, you get a +1 in it. That's all it does. And it's really not even a thing. And I have them keyed to the backgrounds. Now, I say you can just pick skills too. You can stack skills. Because if you do the learning downtime actions in ShadowDark, you can develop your character and learn new things and expand your character's repertoire. And that was kind of their nod to, they don't really allow multi-classing, but they do allow you to kind of move your character beyond the basics with the learning function. And that's how you would get new skills. Or if you roll the 12 on your talent chart, I give the option of the I almost said the keeper. Yeah, I'm already in Call of Cthulhu mode because I was talking to somebody about Call of Cthulhu. And before I came on, the game master of ShadowDark can let you take a skill or give an additional +1 to one of your existing skills. Now, I don't recommend giving more than a +2 or a +3 to your skills in ShadowDark because that can really unbalance things. Like again, you're working at a much smaller scale than like 5th edition D&D, where you're like, yeah, I'm adding +23 to my attack, or yeah, I'm going to roll my Arcana skill to figure out what spell was just cast, and I rolled a 48, right? I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but not much. I still want to keep the scale of ShadowDark and ShadowWest low. So again, if you're just trying to intimidate somebody and you have the intimidate skill, you get a +1 on your charisma check to do it. That's all they do. They don't create a new system. They don't unbalance anything. It was a nice, so when I've seen it played at my table in ShadowDark, it gave a nice little edge. Certain characters got a nice little edge to do things, and it helped kind of define who the character was a little bit more. But it didn't really change. It was in no case was it a game changer. In no case was it so this was obsolete because they had this skill or they had to roll a whole new system. So that's my clarification on that. So if anyone's watching it and was concerned about the skills, I just want to give that explanation because it's come up more than once. And I've had several people, even a couple people who I've played with, who I pitched this to said, well, why do you need skills? You know, that's part of the point is you don't need them for this game. I agree, you don't need them. One, I like them. And two, I think it could be really fun, especially in the Old West, to have your characters fleshed out as people a little bit more. And in fleshing them out as people, giving them those little bits of extra focus and extra definition. So that's my chat for tonight. Character development stream 2. Any questions? Any comments? Go ahead, hit me with them. But we will not be streaming at least for a few weeks. I'll be away for one, and two, I'll be doing some other things, try to really focus on other things. But we're going to be doing a design stream for the 2 new character classes. I'm estimating it'll probably be July, probably mid-July, probably after the convention, after Dex Light, and after the odd day gaming. And then we will more than likely do some playtesting online and do some development streams. And I'm going to be asking people their opinions on what they want to see in the new classes and how they would like to see them, how they would like to see some of the choices made. So that should be a lot of fun. So again, just for anybody who's going to watch the second half of this or come in late, I will give one last pitch, of course, foxandboardgames.com. I think it actually just appeared in my chat. Thank you. And we're going to present Share screen. And we'll jump back to the Kickstarter, do a little refresh. So here we are. We are at Kickstarter.com projects, Fox and Board Games, ShadowWest. We have 2 weeks, 14 days to go. And there are things that are certain add-ons and stretch goals are only going to be available during the Kickstarter. So if you want those, then go ahead and back it. Again, any digital stretch goals, all Kickstarter backers will get physical ones. The highest tiers will get a physical copy, but they will be for sale at checkout if you want your own physical copy in addition to your digital copy. And a lot of the add-ons are not going to be offered online, at least after this is done. And if I have any extras from the Kickstarter run, then I will be, let's see. Oh, cool. An example of a scout character. Larry Comanche. I don't know Comanche. Yeah, the Old West lore and fiction and movies are full of some awesome scout type characters. And they run the real gamut of personalities, of character types, of archetypes. So there it is. And of course, we're on all social media at Fox and Board Games. Check this out on YouTube. And thanks for your support. Any other questions? I like throwing suggestions of readings up here too. I think that's great for people who come and watch this later. And I will, by the way, have a appendix of it's films, books, documentary material, and music that I found inspirational and I've drawn on from creating this. A friend of mine gave me, thank you. A friend of mine gave me a wonderful photographic book of ghost towns of the Old West when he dropped by. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. A music collaborator of mine came by for a little get together. All right, no, thank you. Thanks for coming. Let's see. So the Range Riders have the commune animal. Yeah, actually, so you put me a little bit later. They do actually have the ability to, let me jump back to that real quick. Not that you won't see this in person close enough, soon enough. And because I will be bringing some materials for it to upcoming conventions. So their animal ability is part of Plains Life. And they have +1 reaction checks when dealing with newly met horses, and +1 when dealing with other animals, both wild and domestic. So, yes, they absolutely will have some extra communicative ability with animals. Mystics don't necessarily have a bond or communion with animals. They can summon them to do their bidding, but they don't necessarily have an empathy towards them. And again, I'm thinking that we're eventually going to see a class, if this setting continues and is popular, we're going to eventually see a naturalist, animist type of class. Obviously, it would make sense to have them be rooted in indigenous culture, but not necessarily, because there are people from every culture who are more attuned to animals and have an almost magical bond with them. Other questions? Thanks. These are great. Great conversation. Great questions. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else develops. Thanks. Yeah, I'm happy with it's coming. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be really fun. And people are really excited about it, and that's the best. When I go on to like the Kickstarter and people are talking about it in the comments, I'm like, this is great. And like I said, I had no idea it was going to be featured on EN-World, on their little blurb about up and coming crowdsourcing and Kickstarter stuff. All right, folks. Thank you very much. This was a much longer stream than I thought. I don't mind. Enjoyed it a lot. Enjoyed everybody's company. And I'll see everybody online, see you on social media. Have a great night.